Hello and welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, your daily guide to decoding current affairs the smart way for UPSC. It's April 14th, 2026 and today's edition brings two important analysis articles for your mains preparation. First, the Noida workers' protest and the minimum wage crisis. We will be examining labor rights, enforcement gaps, and the broader implications for India's informal workplace. Second, we will be having a look into why the US health regulator, that is the FDA, is having a strong global dominance and how we can have more equity in healthcare access across the world. Finally, we will be concluding the discussion with prelims pointers, which are highly crucial for the upcoming prelims exam on May 24, 2026. So let's begin. Hey guys, welcome back to the Analyst. I hope all of you are doing well, and the candidates who are preparing for prelims for this year, I hope all of you are doing that quite well. Also, for the ones who are aspiring for the next year, we have to be very well aware of the issues which are taking place right now, such as this one. Since yesterday morning, you must have seen in the local news or say in your social media that there are so many factory workers in Noida who are protesting against the paltry minimum wages that they are getting right now. There have been so many violent protests, there have been so many arrests also, if you can see here. Traffic jams in and around Delhi, which is what makes it very significant for the examination. Not for the volume of the protests, but for the linkages of the protests that we have with GS1, 2, 3 and 4, if you can see here. From society to governance to social justice to inclusive growth and also to work culture, we have to understand why this minimum wage debate is absolute essential for these workers. Now, the main trigger for this was the recent announcement of a minimum wage hike of 35% by the Haryana government, and that is exactly what has angered the UP workers in Noida. Because the UP government did not hike with reference or response to the Haryana government hike. So this has actually resulted in this massive protest. Now, if I can actually talk about more details as to why these laborers and the workers in factories are protesting, we have to firstly understand that this Noida phase 2 industrial area, the place where they are protesting actually, is a major manufacturing hub. And this is why we have a lot of industries, we have a lot of MSMEs who are employed in this particular area. Now all the workers, they are demanding what? They are demanding minimum wage hike. They are working more than overtime, and that is why they want limited working hours. They want also overtime pay. They want a per day calculation of around 800 rupees minimum per day. Also, they are asking for so many social welfare benefits such as PF, such as timely meals, workplace rules, especially safety regulation for women, which all of them are actually alleging that these are lacking right now. Now came this news where if you see across unskilled worker category, semi-skilled and skilled worker, the minimum wages have been hiked in the state of Haryana, and that is why the UP workers are protesting. Now, is this the only reason why this has triggered the protest? No. If you have seen in the recent times, there have been so many workers who have been leaving the urban areas throughout the country, throughout India. Why? Because of the Iran issue and the issue at the Strait of Hormuz. The LPG cylinders and the prices of the same has gone up. The prices have gone up to around 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 per cylinder in black markets, and since the migrant laborers, they do not have a permanent residence, and that is why they do not have a proper LPG connection in their name in the urban areas. Mostly they actually rely on the black market. And if the black market prices of the LPG cylinders are reaching astronomical levels, how they can afford a common lifestyle, a normal basic lifestyle for a family of 3 or a family of 4 in the urban areas with only monthly salaries or minimum wages of around 10,000, 12,000 rupees. That is what we will be analyzing in detail later. But as of now, if you can understand that such protests pertaining to minimum wages is not something new which has happened yesterday. If you see from February 2nd to recent times, across the states of Bihar, Haryana, Gujarat, there have been so many laborers and also factory workers in refinery, in textiles, in diamond industries too, which have been protesting around the same things only. Now this is where we have to now understand the concept of minimum wages in India, because the same landscape is very complex. When we look at the constitutional foundation, we have the directive principles of state policy, wherein under Article 39D and Article 43 we have indirectly and directly the concept of minimum wages, which basically focuses on a living wage concept. This means that any worker needs to fulfill their own living conditions. I mean food, shelter and basic dignities such as sanitation, electricity. Even right now smartphone recharges, for example say telecom connection, data, these are all essentials in 21st century India. So this is exactly why we have to understand that living wage and guaranteeing a living wage is almost a fundamental right also quoted by the Supreme Court, because under Article 23 the Supreme Court is telling that since Article 23 is a fundamental right which actually prohibits forced labor, this means that there has to be a minimum wage in country, right? Because if we do not have a minimum wage pertaining to the number of hours a worker has worked, and if we are not guaranteeing a living wage to them, that means indirectly are we not forcing them to work more without pay? That is exactly what the Supreme Court has inferred according to Article 23 of the Constitution. Now, is there a legal framework for minimum wages in the country? Definitely there is. A very old act of 1948, right? This is known as the Minimum Wages Act. According to the act, the main negotiation and the setting of wages and everything is done by the state government, right? And here, with reference to central industries, the central government will be doing, and mainly most of the industries, MSME, since they're located in the states, the state government is actually having the upper hand here, where the wages are actually revised every 5 years. There is also provision for variable DNS allowances, which is actually inflation adjusted. So according to the levels of inflation, the wages will be adjusted every 2 years. That is also inadequate, if you can understand. Also, more recently we have the Code on Wages, because simply this Minimum Wages Act was not effective. Most of the state governments, they have various amount of different minimum wages, which actually confused the industries in the MSMEs who were actually operating in multiple states. So that is why the central government thought of a uniform one nation one wage principle. That is where Code on Wages 2019 was brought in, right? But actually when we talk about the implementation of the same, this is not done uniformly. We will also have a look as to why. Now, here, we are not only talking about scheduled employments, we are also talking about the informal sector, where the Code on Wages should be implemented by the state government. Also, the central government has decided already a national floor wage, wherein if you look at the central rates with reference to minimum wages across the categories, these are the amounts per day. If you see, from unskilled to highly skilled, you have an increasing trend. Also, if you look at the key components of the recent minimum wage, which has been revised as of April 2026. Firstly, we have a basic pay, which is around 50% of the total cost to company. That means if a factory worker has been working in that factory, 50% must be the basic pay, or whatever is the total negotiated amount of salary between the worker and the factory. So that has to be 50%. Also, this 50% should not be including PF and gratuity, which has to be paid separately. Apart from this, also the provision of variable DNS allowance is there, which has been revised every 6 months. This means that the recent wage and the recent code is actually much more liberal in nature. Now, understand what is the main issue, because this is where you can get a mains question on. If the question is on what are the recent labor issues ongoing in India, so this would be the points that you should give with conviction. Now imagine that there is a worker who is earning how much? 13,000 to 15,000 in total, right? Now since that particular worker has to actually have his own living conditions, so that person has to pay the room rent, food expenses, LPG cylinders, electricity bill, children's education, healthcare, transport, clothes, and so many other miscellaneous expenses. Now you can ask me that, sir, all of these particular workers, they do not spend on most of the items. But if you see, most of the items here, all of the items, if I can tell, are the absolute basic necessities right now. Even I can tell that under miscellaneous consumption or miscellaneous expenditures, they are spending on 5G data recharge. Now you will tell me that 5G is not an essential service, but I will tell you, yes, it is. Because right now, from Aadhaar card verification to ration card and every kind of services, you need internet services right now. Right? So this means that most and all of these things are basic absolute necessities. And if you can total all this cost, it goes more than 500 to 2000 rupees per worker. That means that they are actually spending more than they are earning. And if your spending goes more than you are earning, what happens? You take debt. The main result is that you take on more loans. And these loans are from where? These are not from banks. These are mainly from money lenders. Now the money lenders, you know, are like sharks. These are informal credit institutions which have high rate of interest. For example, I was watching recently a documentary on these kind of laborers and factory workers who are protesting. They are telling that they have taken a loan of around 40,000 rupees from a local money lender for 1 to 2 months. So within 1 to 2 months, they would pay back the amount of loan. Now the interest rate, you know, interest rate was around 50 rupees per day. Every day, that particular person has to pay 50 rupees to that money lender, and that is a reality. 50 rupees to 100 rupees is the interest per day with reference to such amount of loans that they are taking, not for education, not for health, or not for some productive purposes, only to have their living conditions met on a monthly basis with these low salaries. That means that they are perpetually in a debt, and that is why they are in a poverty trap. Because they are very, very close to the poverty line if they are earning around 10,000 to 12,000 rupees per month in urban areas. Especially in Delhi NCR region, that amount is absolutely not enough. Now, apart from the living wage condition, let us look at more issues that these workers are facing, not only in Noida factories but also across the country. Firstly, when we talk about the working hours, you know that in reality, the workers are working 12 hours per day for 6 days, sometimes even without Sundays, and working for more than 72 hours per week. Does this remind you of someone who told that we must be working around 70 hours per week to become more productive, to become more innovative? But what about these workers? They are exceeding by more than 50% because according to Factories Act, 48 hours per week is actually what is humanly permissible. Also, if you are working overtime, you also should be getting overtime payment, that is double the ordinary rate, but they are not getting anything despite 12 hours work. Also, if you look at the minimum wage, for example, if you talk about UP's notified minimum wage, it is around 10,000 to 12,000. That is from unskilled to high skilled work. Right? Now, workers are getting more than that. They're telling that, okay, I'm getting more than the minimum wage. But what about the 12 hours that I'm working? Right? That is more, right? Effectively, I'm getting below minimum wage when I actually talk about no overtime and excess time working. Also, if you look at the meal breaks, they are not getting any proper time according to so many allegations of the protesting workers. They are not allotted a tiffin time and minimum meal break. Also, with reference to women's safety such as creche facilities and various other facilities, they are also lacking. Also, with reference to other social security benefits such as PF and ESI, that is a health insurance scheme, right? The employers do not contribute properly, right? And also, many of the workers, they do not actually report any PF deductions. That means that they are absolutely on the hinge and they are actually on the edge of their poverty levels. Now, can we talk also about the factories? Can we also talk about the factories and why the companies are resisting giving them increased wages? Can we talk about the global situation right now? If we can look at India, and the cost of starting a business in India, right? It is around $142. As of 2020, World Bank Ease of Doing Business report, right? If you look at China, China's cost of doing business is lower than India. Now, if you look at more close competitors such as Indonesia, it is also lower. If you look at Vietnam, right, it is also lower than India. That means that in India, we have much more higher cost, right, to start a business. So, if you understand that wage is actually a cost of doing business, right, and that is why keeping the wages low actually make the business more competitive globally. So this is actually an exploitation that the workers are facing just in the name of making India more competitive globally. Also, if you can understand that the code of wages is very poorly enforced across the various states. If you see, mainly there are few number of states which have implemented the code on wages. Most of the states, they did not yet implement properly. Also, if you can understand that in India, we mainly have textile industries, right, and various other food processing industries, various other factories which deal with nut bolts and small machineries. These are labor intensive industries where we are using more of labor simply because we are a labor surplus country. When it comes to unskilled labor, we have a surplus of the same, and that is why if the supply of labor is so much, then the employers have so many other opportunities to hire a worker at lower wages. If some worker will be demanding more wages, that employer can simply fire him. And that is what is the main cons of India being a labor intensive country. Also, if you can understand the amount and the scale of the informal sector which is dominant in India, more than 2/3 of Indian non-farm jobs are informal. Now forget the farming sector. We are not talking about the farming sector here. We are talking about all the other sectors in India which actually belong to the informal sector. If you see here, mainly in urban areas, we have 66% of the informal sector. In urban areas, only 10% is government, only 17% is private formal sector, and 7% others. That is can be business or self-employed. But 66%, they are outside any social security benefits. They are sometimes not even covered by minimum wages acts, right? Also, if you can look at the rural areas, right? Here, these rural areas are not under, for example, this informal sector of 79%. This is not under rural or say agricultural sector. This is non-farm sector. Here we are also talking about those local MSMEs and the factories. If you understand, informal sector is simply too much. Where we have states such as Bihar, Telangana, Uttarakhand, Odisha, who are actually having most of these workers, and mainly they are contract workers. Contract worker system is predominant in India. This is why we understand that some of the workers are actually taken by third-party agents. So most of the factories, the big factories, they give the contract to these third-party agents, and they then hire these contract workers, and sometimes in various cases of industrial accidents and disputes, sometimes these contract workers do not even get compensations. Also, if you can understand that there is a race to the bottom in the country when we talk about between the state governments. If you have seen that the Haryana government has increased the wages, the UP government did not, right? Now, there have been so many reasons why the states themselves would want to keep the wages lower. Because right now, if you can understand, there is an intense amount of interstate competition. All of the states are wanting more investments in their particular states. Haryana would want more investments. Noida government or say UP government would want more AI data centers to be set up. And that is why, with reference to MSMEs and the overall level of salaries and the minimum wages, if they are lower, then only they can attract more businesses, right? So this is exactly what is happening right now. Sometimes the state governments do not increase the wages, minimum wages, according to the national code on wages, right? Also, there is a political economy which is undertaking, which means that very big entrepreneurs, very big business houses, they give direct funding to the local and regional political parties which intentionally do not increase the wages at the state level. Because these local business houses, these local entrepreneurs, they create a pressure group. This is also a term in a syllabus of GS2. Pressure groups apply pressure on the ruling government to listen to their demands. In this case, the big business houses can pressurize the government, the state government, to keep the wages intentionally lower. And the state governments also, on the other hand, they are also concerned about investment flight. That if at all the minimum wages increase, there will be some companies which will totally sell their assets in that state and move to another state. So these are all the main issues that we have to also think from employers' perspective, because all of you are UPSC aspirants. All of you will be talking to both of the parties. You have to find a balanced and a neutral approach. Now, before that, you are also someone who will be dealing with the protest tomorrow. So you have to understand the social dynamics too, the social contract which is broken during such amount of protest. For example, say imagine that there is a software engineer who is returning from Noida to Delhi to his house, and in between the person is seeing a lot of traffic jam. So that particular software engineer who is living a very comfortable life, they won't be associating their particular, also the workers' issues with his own daily issues, because for him the daily issue is a traffic jam. Also, if you understand, there have been a lot of arrests by the police of the protesters. So here we are also doing a criminalization of poverty, because already these guys are actually earning way below the minimum wage. On the top of that, we are labeling them as outsiders. There have been so many allegations of regionalism, right? Also, miscreants tags have been given to them. So we are actually criminalizing them even more. Also, for example, the workers actually talk to the factory owners. They actually wanted to talk to the district officials, but they did not according to them. Now, when they resorted to violence, they burned some vehicles. Suddenly, the entire nation is listening to them. So, are we sending a message that violence is the only way to bargain in India with reference to some demands? We have also seen some similar things happening before such protests on a national level. In the comment section, you can let me know. Also, if we see that this kind of violent protests are going on, factories are actually shut down due to these labor strikes, what will happen to the technological development? It can increase even more, because technologies do not strike, they do not complain about minimum wages. And at the end of the day, women are facing the worst crisis, because they are facing double issues. During work, they were not having proper safeguards. Right now, they are having unemployment crisis. Also, conservative families who once allowed the women to work in those factories, right now the families will not be giving consent to those women, and leading to loss of livelihood and also per capita income for the women. Also, at the end of the day, since these protests are undergoing right now, and a lot of women also will be losing their jobs, mainly they can concentrate in some say slum areas with the various living conditions deteriorating and the quality of life going down. So this is what we have to recall the words of Mahatma Gandhi, where poverty is the worst form of violence. So if they're violent right now, it is actually because of their poverty. We have to be more empathetic and compassionate for them. Firstly, we have to enforce the social security fund under the new labor codes and give them proper compensation in cases of loss of minimum wages. Also, there must be dynamic wage fixing according to inflation, according to interstate levels, and also according to the difference between the minimum wages across the various state governments. Also, there must be a global indicator with reference to such factories who are operating on a global level too. For example, factories which are involved in export-import businesses. So we can also compare the global labor minimum price. Also, we must be having a new overtime calculation at the factory level itself. Next, targeted subsidies must be given to particular sectors, to particular workers who need more of them, for example, pregnant women or the various disabled workforce who are employed in such hazardous factories. Also, strict enforcement of the code on wages, that is 50% of the basic pay, with reference to PF and gratuity, must be enforced as of now. There can be a digital escrow monitoring system directly in the hands of district magistrate, where the district magistrate can actually have this system in his or her own laptop or computer, by which they can actually look into what is the kind of minimum wages which are paid in all of the factories in his or her own state of administration. So this escrow system will be actually a system of wages, timely payments, overtime payments, subsidies, if at all these are going to the workers in real time or not. And at the end of the day, all of them must come together and sit for a discussion. The workers who are protesting, they must also realize that burning buses, cars, creating traffic jams will make the system even more hostile against them. So they must all come together, government, factory workers, owners, unions, and try to broker a peace. Because since India is actually aspiring to become a global manufacturing hub, we have to firstly understand and rehabilitate the main labor who run the factory. So that is where you can actually practice this question. Maybe let me know the answer in the comments below so that I can also leave a feedback and a like for you. So now we can move on to the next one. So in the Indian Express today we have an article on the aspect of global health governance. Global health governance or public health infrastructure globally is a very serious topic, specifically when we saw the outbreak of the COVID-19 and how the entire world responded against this particular pandemic. Was that moment where we understood and realized the importance of having a unified global health approach. But if you can understand, if this entire architecture of the global health standard and governance is only in the hands of one country, that is US, then that country can become a dictator. If you can understand, US is almost a dictator in most of the global military economic affairs right now. The same they are trying to do in the health sector too. This is why this makes this topic very serious for your GS2 particular aspects when it comes to health, also international institutions, because we are talking about the US Health Regulatory Department, and also we are talking about inclusive growth. Now, when we actually firstly understand what do you mean by global health governance. Now, global health governance is actually an intangible term. You cannot see it, but it is actually a system of institutions, such as, for example, firstly, when we talk about global health, the only word that comes to our mind is WHO, the World Health Organization, which is actually functioning under the United Nations. And we understand that when it comes to vaccines, when it comes to global health responses, pandemics, global health policies, so this is where we understand that the WHO plays a most crucial role, right? Now, we have another kind of actors also. For example, say we have some public-private partnerships. Now, these are massive companies, private companies such as Gavi, or even some, welfare funds such as the Global Fund, which is actually funding various fights against the tuberculosis, HIV, and various other, widespread international diseases. So mainly when we talk about the global health governance, this private-public partnerships is trying to have various rules, various fundings, various regulations, and sometimes they can even become more powerful with reference to WHO in particular diseases. Also, we have some very wealthy groups such as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or various other charitable organizations or philanthropies who run a network of hospitals, clinics, diagnostic labs, funds, and also vaccine diplomacy with reference to some major diseases. So, these are the key actors in the global area. And they actually make healthcare an affordable access for most of the population, and mainly in the least developing countries, in the small island developing countries. So these are all the countries which need immediate health interventions to uplift their population from misery and backward health characteristics. Because if you can understand, as of now, the silent pandemics which are actually not seen on the top of it, but which are plaguing the institutions and also the population gradually, is that firstly, we are having an increasing amount of non-communicable diseases burden because of changing lifestyle, right? Because of increasing incomes of the people. People are actually not working out. People are not having good diet. People are actually worrying more because of the same. They are having diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, cancer. So this is what is increasing in burden in the entire world, and that is exactly why the global health governance needs to be very, very strong. Apart from this, we also have the antimicrobial resistance. This is where we understand that our bodies and immune system are not actually responding to basic or first line drugs, because simply the virus, bacteria have become more and more evolved with reference to the medicines because of our negligence. Sometimes we do not take the proper dosage as recommended by the doctors, and that is what makes the bacteria and the viruses and the various other pathogens much more potent and much more immune to the first line drugs, which is a silent pandemic. Because at your hospitals, at mainly the government hospitals, this AMR is spreading like wildfire in India and also the rest of the world. And also, with reference to healthcare sector, we have a lot of data, public data, which must be kept safe. There have been a lot of allegations on China and Russia to have, stolen the healthcare data with reference to various hospitals and institutions around the world. So that is why we have to understand that global healthcare governance is actually a system of institution, rules and processes, in which, the countries and also the non-state actors such as the non-government actors such as private companies, they actually address the various health challenges across national borders. But this is what an ideal situation is. But what is actually happening? The US government, it has their own federal drug administration, which is kind of having a much more greater supremacy than most of the global health regulators, right? And that is what we have to understand, that this US FDA is having a de facto authority, because simply we have to understand that the US is the world's most profitable pharmaceutical market. Even for India, we have US as one of the highest export markets for pharmaceutical products. The US FDA's current good manufacturing practices are followed by mostly all of the countries globally. Why? Because these are the most advanced amounts of codes and standard as to how some medicines must be made using some particular technology, using some particular laboratory clinics and testing facilities. So this is what is the current gold standard is, which is copied, right, in a copy paste mechanism by most of the countries there, right? So that means that if right now in India the CDSCO, which is the main regulator, so we are trying to just copy paste the mechanism which is followed in the US, because we are now trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to medical standards. Since US FDA has already done that, we are trying to follow it. Similarly, Latin American countries, the African nations, they are also following the same. So indirectly, if the US will change these kind of practices, that means globally the practices and the standards also have changed. So this is a kind of an indirect de facto authority that the US FDA tries to assert. For example, recently the US FDA totally disregarded the global pandemic agreement under the WHO. This agreement would have been a very good agreement to actually safely prohibit any kind of future pandemics and takes proper strict actions with reference to some handling cases, virus or some bacteria and various other testing procedures, but they totally denied it. Also, with reference to adoption of some new AI machines or some new machine learning technology or some new amount of biotechnology, the US FDA is far ahead than most of the other countries. For example, recently the ISO 13485 is a new medical device standard which was devised by the US FDA itself, and we are following the same. Also, they are empowered to do foreign inspections. So whenever they will feel that okay, some Indian drug is not working well, they can come into India and they can actually inspect some of the factories under some agreements that we have with them, right? So this means that they are actually quite powerful, but they are also in crisis right now, because there have been massive talent shortages in recent times because most of the experts have left the US FDA. Also, there is a leadership vacuum, right? Now, the US FDA wants to make America healthy again. due to which they have their national priority voucher, under which they want to speed up the testing of drugs. And that is why most of the pharmaceutical companies, they are actually apprehensive that this speeding up will lead to reduction in quality. Also, most of the US companies in pharmaceutical sector, they are consistently missing the deadlines of testing because US FDA is having shortages of manpower. Also, this kind of practices which are taking place at the US FDA means that the US FDA is not properly functioning well, which is totally destabilizing the global market, and that is why we are actually moving more closely and following the standards of the European Medicines Agency. Also, if you have understood recently, Donald Trump loves exiting international institutes, and that is where it has also exited the WHO. This means that the WHO will not be able to exercise its authority over the US properly. Now, when we talk about India and Indian context, we are actually known as pharmacy of the world. By volume, we are actually third, and by actually value, we are 14th. That means that we have a lot of business going on in the pharmaceutical sector in the entire world. We are exporting to more than 200 plus countries. More than 40 to 50% of the generic medicines demand in the US is fulfilled by India, and that is why India is actually known as one of the largest manufacturers of generic medicines, right? These are the medicines where the main patents of the medicines have expired, and right now most of the pharmaceutical companies, they can actually manufacture those medicines. For example, paracetamol, when it was first designed and actually manufactured as mass medicine, it was heavily patented and it was very, very costly. Now, patents expire after a particular period of time, and then if one local Indian pharmaceutical company would love to manufacture paracetamol, they can do it without any patent. Now, these are actually generic medicines where India is having a huge amount of valuation, right? Also, the total growth potential, as of 2025 is around $55 billion, projected to reach around $130 billion by 2030. Now, these are all important facts for your means. Now, when we look at the domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing companies in the country, now we have some issues. Firstly, 40% of the drugs of generic type are supplied to the US, right? And right now, we have to understand that US is a very, very major part of our export market in the pharmaceutical sector. And if at all, sometimes, if Donald Trump would love to torture us, irritate us by telling that, okay, this particular medicine is not of good quality, or this kind of drug is not having a particular testing parameter, then what will happen? Then the entire generic drug market would actually gradually vanish, the demand from US would go down, and our pharmacy of the world tag would be hurt, and that is what actually we have to understand. We need to diversify. Apart from this, we also have other issues in the domestic sector. For example, see, recently I have seen so many cough syrup linked deaths were taking place, right? Also in Africa, we have seen so many cases where children have died due to cough syrup consumed which were manufactured by Indian pharmaceutical companies. So this is a domestic issue, this is a real issue. Apart from this, testing, trials are actually quite delayed in the country. So this is where we have to understand the government needs to take some action, and that is where the government is also stepping up. We have to diversify away from the US right now. Now this is where these kind of issues which are taking place at the US FDA gives the Central Drug Standard Control Organization the main authority to diversify our options. So this is where we have to come with our own rules and standards so that other countries can follow Indian standards. For example, we have come with Schedule M. Schedule M is actually part of the quality standards that medicines must be following in the country, right? It is actually under the Drugs and Cosmetic Act of 1940, wherein it is almost close to the FDA's standard, right, that we have discussed, the gold standard, but in an own Indian format. Also, we are having this Biopharma Shakti mission, where we are actually spending more on biologics, right? For example, healthcare through knowledge, innovation, technology in the biological sector. For example, we would set up more research labs, startup grants, and also focusing a lot on something which we know as biosimilars. Biosimilars are almost like the generic medicines, but these are much more higher valued medicines. Right? Higher valued medicines would actually give much more higher profit margins for the local startups and the local companies. Right? Also, when we talk about regulatory diplomacy, right now the CDSCO and Indian government as a whole has the opportunity to grab the global south and actually tell them that we are also on the similar standards, because when we talk about the exports, we are actually having an potential to double the exports by 2030. And this is why the government of India has also announced so many schemes such as the PLI scheme in medicines itself and in pharmaceutical industries, where India is right now manufacturing key starting materials which are actually raw materials for the pharmaceutical industries, where most of the raw materials we were importing from China, which are known as the APIs, right? APIs are those raw materials which go into manufacturing of the medicines themselves. These are active pharmaceutical ingredients. Now, these are actually those ingredients where we are actually still now dependent on China. So we are trying to have the same in our PLI scheme itself, right, where we have the outlay of around 6,000 crore rupees, where most of the companies in India, they can set up shops and they can have much more production. Now, in the same aspect, we are also attracting a little bit of investment from China, because right now we have liberalized 10% FDI under automatic route from China and the land sharing border countries, right? We have changed the FDI norm that up to 10% FDI can come from China, right? That means that we are actually attracting the FDI in pharmaceutical industries mainly to have more APIs in the country itself. Also, India has the WHO Global Traditional Medicine Center established at Jamnagar, Gujarat. We did the same in April 2022. And it is the only global outposted center for traditional medicine in the entire world, with around $250 million funding by India. That means India is taking a leadership in the traditional medicine sector. So that is where we have to spread this to the world, because we have to shift from the pharmacy of the world to laboratory of the world. That is where let us capture the $180 billion opportunity that we can get from those patents which are expiring from 2026 and 2030. In these 5 years, we will be having more global medicine patents which will be expiring. So let us manufacture them. Also, let us become a global hub, not for creating new drugs, but also testing new drugs too. Right now, we have reduced the testing time to 45 days. So we can have more benefits in this. We can also cooperate with the neighboring countries such as China. We can cooperate with them to bring in more investment under the 10% automatic route, right? We can also cooperate with Bangladesh, Nepal to supply our medicines and actually to have a better regional diplomacy by giving them a framework of our health standards. We need to also strengthen the WHO, where China is actively doing the same by funding a lot of money in the WHO. We also have to do the same. We have to increase the funding just like the same we did with the traditional medicine. And at the end of the day, we can also take up contract research and manufacturing. Right? We can increase the research and development in the pharmaceutical sector. We can take up various infrastructural and various research aspects, mainly with reference to the private companies who are doing good. These are the private companies who are earning massive amount of revenues. They can actually do more and more amount of contract research with reference to foreign universities and foreign companies in the country itself. So this brings us to the end of the mains articles. There is a question again for all of you. Now we'll be moving on to the prelims pointers. So the West Bengal SIR debate reached the Supreme Court, where you have seen that in a recent time there have been a lot of people who have been excluded from the voter list with reference to the elections which will be taking place very soon. Now, the Supreme Court has told that the right to vote is a sentimental right. Let us understand actually what this means in the context of the exam. Firstly, let us start by understanding the very basic nature of rights. Now, rights are very basic, all of us are actually entitled to various kinds of rights. Now these are actually justified claim or privilege that you have with reference to various freedoms or protections which are enforceable via legal institutions like constitution or parliament or state legislative assemblies or etc. Right? Now, firstly, when we talk about the various kinds of rights, firstly you know that we come across natural rights. Just because you are a human being, you have various natural rights. Just because you are a human being, you need basic dignity, you need shelter, you need protection, you need various freedoms also. So these are actually part of your natural rights. Now, when we talk about the enforceability or how we can enforce these natural rights, there is no particular framework for the same. Right? Now, unless they are codified, unless we have a law for that, we do not have that all of the natural rights, they are automatically protected. Similarly, the same goes for moral rights. Moral rights are like your parents can expect that you will be taking care of them. So this is like your parents are thinking that they have a right over you. But legally, is there any law for that? No. In India, we do not have any law. In the world also, we do not have any law for this. Right? So this means that these are also not legally enforceable, but these are based on society's moral reasonings. But here, when we talk about fundamental rights, these are actually those kind of rights in India which are part of your constitution. These are constitutional rights, these are legal rights, these are also most fundamental in nature, which are basic to your constitution. And these are enforceable. For these you can go to directly Supreme Court. Right? Also, when we talk about constitutional rights, so these are not fundamental in nature, but these are mentioned in the constitution, for which we need a law. Now these are outside part 3, these are outside fundamental rights, for which you need a law enacted by the parliament, right? And also for this you cannot go directly to the Supreme Court. You have to follow the usual judiciary process. And at the end of the day, these are the most common kind of rights, the statutory rights, the legal rights also they are known as. Now these are there because we have laws passed by the parliament, we have laws passed by the state legislative assemblies. Also with reference to statutory rights, this can be fundamental rights also or constitutional rights also. Or this can be purely non-fundamental, non-constitutional also. So do not confuse this, because in 2017 and 2021, they have asked you even the most basic thing, that what is a right. Now some of you can question me that why am I starting with absolute basics such as what are rights? Because UPSC sometimes run out of questions. They have already asked the most advanced questions in my opinion, and they are going to target your most basic understanding. Let me know right now what is the answer in the comments of these two ones. Now, when we move on to the right to vote, before we understand what is sentimental right to vote, firstly understand what is right to vote. Now you know that under constitutional provisions, under Article 326, elections, the word elections is there, to the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assembly should be based on adult suffrage. That means that 18 years is the minimum age where you can actually vote, and if you are not disqualified from voting, you can actually vote. You are entitled to register yourself as a voter. Now this was the constitutional basis of your right to vote if you are 18 years of age. Your constitution has told this, that means it is your constitutional right. It is your legal constitutional right. Also, why legal right? Because we have two acts for the same, RPA 1950 and RPA 1951. RPA 1950 tells that okay, non-citizens cannot vote and ordinary residents 18 years plus can vote. Also, section 62 of RPA 1951 is telling that every person whose name is on an electoral roll has the right to vote. So if your name is on your electoral roll, you can easily vote. Now what is the judiciary telling it? Now there have been so many debates as to where the right to vote should be a legal right or should be a fundamental right. See guys, legal right and constitutional right, they can be almost similar. Because for enforcement of your fundamental right, you can directly go to Supreme Court. That means it is the most fundamental to your existence. The Supreme Court has told that okay, right to vote is actually a legal right. It is not your fundamental right. Right? Because in the first one, 1952 case, in a Ponnuswamy case, the Supreme Court explicitly stated that it is a statutory right. Right? Now, Jyoti Basu case in 1982, the Supreme Court directly clarified that it is neither a fundamental right nor a common law right. That means that it is actually existence upon your age, upon your electoral roll, right, and all of the procedures that the Election Commission of India has to verify your residence, your names, your actual proof of address, and every single thing for which your name must be on the electoral roll. Also, the Kuldeep Nair case of 2006, they have also told that the parliament has the right to restrict the right to vote. The Rajbala case of 2015, it has told that right to vote is a constitutional right, is a legal right, but not a fundamental right again. In the recent case also, in this West Bengal SIR case, Supreme Court has again told that right to vote is not a fundamental right. It is only a sentimental right maybe, because we have to understand, if around 34 lakh voters in this entire SIR exercise which has been ongoing as a voter list cleanup in West Bengal, these people cannot vote because there have been some mismatched names or background details which are not matching right now, right? And that is where the elections which will take place on 23rd of April and 29th of April, they will be left out. Supreme Court has told that, okay, right to vote is not a fundamental right, but it is actually a sentimental right, because people, if they cannot vote for their country or their state, they lose the sentiment, they lose their identity and dignity, right? Also, we have to understand that the human cost of striking a citizen off the voter list is actually not that simple. It is very easy for the government to delete some of the names, for example, but on the other hand, individually, the person can feel that their voice and even their nationality is at question, is at stake. Also, many people, they are patriotic in nature, and since they cannot vote due to some errors or say some amount of mistakes that are taking place right now, that means their patriotic value is also lost. So these are all part of sentiments, and this is what the Supreme Court clarified right now, that it carries immense weight if someone's name is deleted from the voters list, since they cannot vote for the nation's progress and the state's progress. So this is costing and depriving citizens of their legal right, and that is why the Supreme Court has actually asked the authorities, the concerned authorities, to take proper steps against this. Now we will move on to the next topic. The India Meteorological Department has forecasted less than average monsoon this year due to the fears of El Niño. Now, let us understand the very basics of El Niño, which will be very crucial for your prelims revision right now. Now, I know that all of you are experts in geography, but let us walk through as to what happens firstly under normal conditions in the Pacific Ocean. Under normal conditions, the trade wind direction is from the direction from Peruvian waters to Australian and Asian waters, during which generally we have colder conditions here, due to which we have cold upwelling from the oceans, where cold waters rise from the depths of the ocean, resulting in a massive fishing opportunities, where a lot of nutrients also come up with the water, which make the regions of and around the coast of Peru very, very prosperous for fishing. On the other hand, since the direction of the easterly trade winds is towards the Asian continents and the Australian continent, it is where the warm waters there will be causing more precipitation due to the heated waters and the heated conditions here. So under normal conditions for India, we have a normal monsoon, normal agricultural activities can take place under the Kharif season. But during El Nino, this condition reverses. The total condition reverses, where warm conditions are seen around the coast of Peru, due to which the total fishing industries collapse, right? Also, we see more intense rainfall in the Peruvian region and the Latin and South and the North continents of America. Colder conditions persist around the regions of Asia and Australia, due to which the upwelling stops here and the fishing stops actually in this particular region, due to which a lot of fisher folk lose their livelihood, correct? And also, due to the subsiding air, right? In this Asian regions, we have a high pressure zone, due to which we have a dry condition. You know that the winds flow from the high pressure to the low pressure regions. So the winds will be moving from Asia to Latin America, or say the North and the South American regions. So most of the conditions, the rainy conditions will be seen over here and dry conditions will be seen here. That is why we will be having more droughts and less monsoons. Now the opposite is happening, the normal condition with more intensity is happening during La Nina. During La Nina, this cold conditions over this Pacific Ocean part in the north and southern parts of America is much more intensified. Due to this more intense region here, we have much more intense precipitation and rainfall in the Asian region, due to which we have more enhanced and above the normal monsoon that we have also seen over the last few years. We have more flood risk due to more monsoon and harsh winter conditions too. So this is what actually happens. Now when we talk about the global effects of El Nino, this is very, very dangerous, because nowhere in the world is happy with El Nino. Because when we look at South America will be having a collapse of the fishing industries, and also, if you have just understood, dry conditions will be over Asia, wet conditions will be over South America. That is where more rainfalls will happen, more floods and landslides will take place. Australia and Indonesia will face droughts and water shortage, because here we will be having dry conditions, less rainfalls. Also Australia, mainly during our own winter conditions, right, during which the southern hemisphere witnesses summer. So Australian summers will face more wildfires. There it is known as bushfires. Also, global temperatures is expected to rise due to escape of ocean heat into the atmosphere, leading to more amount of recycling of the greenhouse gases and intense amount of heating of the world. Because we have to understand that this differential heating of the Pacific Ocean, since it is getting a huge area from South America to Australia, this is a huge area, and such huge areas impact the global weather conditions, particularly the jet streams. The jet streams, if they are affected, they lead to domino effects. They lead to all of the effects there, and that is why El Nino is actually a very, very dangerous event. But the main thing right now is that we are having monsoon up to 92%. Normal is 96 to 104%. That means if rainfall is between 96 to 104% of historical average rainfall, then it is normal. And we are having only a shortfall, that is only of around 4% shortfall. While this is low, but still this is a good signal. Firstly, because we have some saviors. First savior is because of positive Indian Ocean dipole. Now, during positive Indian Ocean dipole, we have dry conditions over and near African region, due to which we have a low pressure region here, and we have a high pressure region in the Indonesian region. So due to which there will be a good amount of monsoon winds which can come into India and under this kind of positive IOD. Also, we have seen that right now that the Eurasian mountains and the snow cover there is melting, and that is why if those regions, if they are melting, they are getting more heated up, because the albedo effect is going down. Because if the snow cover is going away from the Eurasian mountains, heat is not being reflected in the atmosphere. Heat is melting the snow and it is absorbed in and around those regions, making the Tibetan regions and the Tibetan plateau very, very hot. And if we have more hotter amount of Tibetan plateau, we have low pressure conditions there. And if we have low pressure conditions over and around in this particular Tibetan region, we can have much more attraction of the monsoon winds towards Indian mainland, right? So we can actually pull the southwest monsoon winds. So this is what is actually that we can hope for, that this monsoon can be a little bit less than normal, but still not that worse. So let us now move on to the next topic, because we are done with this one. So the Congress has issued 3-line whip. So let us understand from the perspective of prelims firstly, what do you mean by whip? Now the origin of the whip system is actually dated back to British, because the British is actually following a parliamentary system where all of the members of the parliament will be gathering at the House of the Commons, and according to their respective political parties, they should be taking their own political decisions and the major party decisions. So what happens in India, we do not have any constitutional status for whip, right? There is no constitutional status, nor it is written in the rules of the house, nowhere. It is only a convention, right? It is only a convention where firstly we have to understand that in the parliament there has to be an uniformity with reference to what the political parties they want to achieve. And if there is no uniformity within the same political party, if there is no brotherhood and there is no agreement on common national issues of the political party, that means that that party is weak. So to strengthen it, that particular political party has to have a person who has to be a senior member as their designated whip. Imagine that this whip is like a class monitor. That class monitor will be like a floor manager on the house, on the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, and that is where the attendance, party discipline, decorum, behavior, rules, procedures, everything has to be ensured. For example, if the Congress has a whip, all the Congress MPs in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha has to adhere to the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha Congress whip, who will be the senior members, right? Now, there has to be official written instruction by the whip to all the members that, okay, you have to vote on this particular issue, on this motion, on this resolution, and based on the severity of the instruction, it has been classified as 3 kind of whips: 1 line, 2 line and 3 line. 1 line whips are actually those kind of whips where the members are actually allowed to even abstain from voting. They can abstain without attracting any penalties. The 2 line is where, the physical presence of the members must be actually ensured, and they must be ensuring quorum. And here, the party does not explicitly force them to vote in a particular direction. But the most serious one is the 3-line way, because there is no flexibility. All of the party members must be present, they must be voting according to the same direction that the whip has told them to. So we can now understand that the role and function of the main whip is to have good internal coordination between the members, so they can have a unified objective in the house. They can actually meet the quorum, because under Article 100, the quorum is 1/10 of the total members. That is, in Lok Sabha, it is 55, in Rajya Sabha, it is 25. Right? Now, the whip can also serve as an early warning system. Why? Because if someone is not obeying the 3-line whip, that means that member of parliament or MLA maybe is influenced by some other political parties to not vote in that particular direction, because sometimes in motions like no confidence motion or budget or various other important constitutional amendment bills, the votes of each and every MP becomes important, and that is where your anti-defection law comes in. If someone is not obeying your 3-line whip, if one MP is not obeying your 3-line whip, then that person can face anti-defection provisions, right? That person can be expelled from the house, right? Based on the entire detailed procedure in the anti-defection law, right? So they can face immediate expulsion. But the only exception is when some merger is seen according to the 2/3 rule. In the comment section, you let me know what exactly that rule is all about. And this is the only exception that we have under the whip system, under the 3-line system. So this is where now we will move on to this PYQ from 2013, a very conceptual one. You let me know what is the answer in the comments. We'll now move on to the next topic. The LIC board has approved 1-to-1 bonus share issue. Now, let us actually understand what this bonus share is all about. Firstly, you understand that any company or any government entity, for example, LIC in this matter, if it is listed on the public stock exchanges, then they can issue shares to the common public, right? Now imagine that LIC suddenly has made a lot of profit. Now LIC does not want to keep the profit with itself. It is wanting to release the profit as share capital into the market. So as part of the profit, it is trying to give the entire one to the various investors in the public market. So that is what LIC is done right now, because it wants to free the reserves with reference to the profits that has been accumulated, and it is right now wanting to convert the profit into shares so that people would be buying those shares and will be giving money to LIC, and this money that we are giving to LIC, the LIC can invest it some in various other business, in some projects where we can get much more profits. So this is where LIC firstly has done this bonus share issue. It wants to capitalize on the massive profits that is having right now. Now, how this is happening? For example, say if I have 2000 rupees worth of shares of LIC where I have 20 shares, right? So each share is around how much? 100 rupees, right? Now if LIC is issuing this 1-to-1 bonus share issue, what LIC will do? LIC will just give me one share for every one share that I have free of cost. That means right now how much shares will I have? I will have 20 already which I have. I will have more 20 shares. So total I will have 40 shares in total. But what will happen to the price? The price will also get half. It will actually get to 50 rupees per share. So right now if you multiply 50 into 40, so your total investment amount remains 2000. Total invested amounts will not change. Only what will change? The number of shares will double, right? And the share price will also automatically adjust. So this is how bonus shares are issued. This is actually to reward the existing shareholders. And also sometimes if the stock price become too high, for example, recently this happened in the case of Reliance, almost it reached up to 3000 rupees per share. So Reliance is imagining right now the common retail investor cannot buy these expensive shares. So let us issue 1:1. So this will halve the price to 1500. Now at 1500 people can buy more Reliance shares. It also signals to the market that LIC is fundamentally strong, and that is why it is having more profits. Now, we have to understand one basic difference between stock split and bonus issue. Now, the bonus issue is like you are getting 1:1 extra shares for every share that you hold. But in stock issue, in stock split, what you see that if you have 10 shares and the company is telling that, okay, one share will be divided into 5 shares. So this is where you understand that your existing share is broken down, it's split into 5 shares, right? So this is the main difference. Now, we'll also look at the various other types of shares issues. Firstly, look at two classes, equity classes and preference shares. Equity classes or equity shares means that these are normal shares in the share market, right? These are ordinary equity shares. Reliance, Adani, Jio, all these companies have their own kind of shares based on their risk and reward. That means these are proper private companies. If you want to take the risk in them, you can invest, you can get unlimited profits. You can also get voting rights, right? Also, there are other kind of equity shares where it can give you a less amount of voting rights than the ordinary shares. Come to the preference shares where you can actually get fixed dividend but no voting rights. This can be based on cumulative versus non-cumulative levels. This means that since preference shares give dividends out of their profits, and if some company has missed giving dividend in one particular year, the cumulative preference shares will allow you to claim your dividend or missed dividend in the next year if the company has missed the previous one. But non-cumulative means that you cannot claim it as a right. That if dividend has been missed in the last year or the previous years, you cannot claim that it has to be given cumulatively to you in the next year. Also, there are some convertible preference shares. Convertible preference shares means that these preference shares can be converted into normal equity. Non-convertible means that it cannot be converted. You can only get dividends forever. Finally, we have the participating versus non-participating preference shares. So this is where you can actually claim higher share of profits based on the dividends. For example, if the company has told that, okay, I will give you 5% dividends, right? So some kind of preference shares can give you more than 5% of the profits of the companies. So these are based on the profit levels. Now, based on the modes of issues, we also have 4 types. Firstly, we have public issue. Public issue, firstly, we have the initial public offering, where for the first time, if one company is going public, listing on the stock exchange, now existing shareholders are actually selling their existing shares to the open public for the first time. Next, follow-on public offering means that here already listed companies are issuing more shares to the people, right? Also, for existing shareholders, companies sometimes also give rights issues. That okay, if I am releasing new shares, my existing shareholders should be actually sold the shares first. They should get the first opportunity. Bonus issues we have already seen. These are also one kind of 1:1 stocks that we give. Also, issues for the employees are like that employee stock option plans and sweat equity. So both of these actually try to reward mainly the directors, the managers, and the various other employees of the companies to have more ownership and participation in the company. And at the end of the day, we also have private placement and preferential allotment. Some very big companies, sometimes even startups, can tell that, okay, I do not want public investors to invest in my company. I only want very big, very, very big banks, very, very big investors, foreign investors to invest only. So only I am selling to those private agencies and companies. So these are all the things that you have to keep in mind for the various types of share issues. Now we can move on to the last article of the day. So the consumer price index, the retail price index has risen 3.4%. That was in the month of March. Now, month of March was also the month where we have seen the escalating conflict between US and Iran, right? So this is where you have to understand that there are some of the PYQs. I want you to solve these answers in the comments below. Also, if you understand that inflation targeting is a part of our monetary policy, where we have the target of 4 plus minus 2%, which was recently extended till 2031, making this topic highly, highly important for your prelims examination. Now, you all know recently that the CPI basket was changed. The base year right now is changed to 2024, where food and beverages, right, and clothing, they got more weightages. Why? Because simply from 2012 to right now, we are actually spending less on food and less on clothing. And this is why, because we are having major lifestyle shifts, because apart from food and clothing, we are actually spending more on other things such as housing, where we have fuel and electricity plus gas connections. That is why weightage has increased. Transportation, we are increasing. Why? Because we are actually spending more on transport, right? Also, we are spending more on health. Health inflation is taking place. Also, during the COVID pandemic, we spend a lot on health. Communication is increasing because we are actually using more and more data, right? Also, pan and tobacco, God knows why, it has also been seen on a rising trend. But the thing is that, as of now, if you can look into the March 2026 data, overall inflation, that is the headline inflation, has gone up. Total inflation has gone up. If I exclude food and fuel from the total, we get the core inflation. And mainly we see that we have seen a little bit of higher inflation in the volatile items such as the food and the fuel, if you see, right? And also the food inflation was kind of stable, but it was mainly the fuel inflation that we have seen, that due to LPG crisis, the cylinder crisis, and the various crude oil crisis taking place, the fuel and light sector has gone up. And also, if you understand, the rural inflation right now is more than the urban one. Between the states, Telangana is facing highest amount of inflation. Now, the main amount of inflation that has risen is due to food and geopolitical fuel shock, as you can see here. Mainly, if you see, the inflation levels have gone up mainly in this particular sector of food and fuel. But the economists are still telling that, okay, this is quite stable, because inflation is still within RBI safety zone. Inflation right now is 3.4%. We are in the range of 2% to 6% inflation, which is actually within RBI's target. Also, government has shielded the prices of fuel, right? Government did not yet increase dramatically and drastically like all the other countries are doing. So the Indian government has shielded the people. Also, in the recent monetary policy meeting by the RBI, the repo rates have been kept unchanged. That means the RBI also do not want us to panic regarding inflation and rising inflation levels, because RBI did not change the repo rate, as we have also seen in the last analysis discussion. So this was actually all for that day. I want before that you all to solve another two questions based on the recent index of CPI, and also what do you think about the levels of demand full inflation in this particular question. So I thank you all for being a very patient audience. Please do attend the quiz which is following up, highly crucial for your prelims examination. But till we meet again, till then, all the best and best of luck. Thank you.